Good afternoon, Marian.
Good afternoon, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I love opportunities to connect with HR professionals. I always learn something when I'm talking to someone in the human resource space. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm so grateful that we have a mutual friend that introduced us. I have really enjoyed our conversations. So before we dive in, we're talking about leading with empathy during the pandemic. Just a little bit for people who are watching what my series, Michelle's Conversations That Matter, is all about. I'm out to elevate the conversation about mental well-being, cultivate more compassion around the topic, but really bring my audience, people like yourself and others, to really help us learn more, help us get inspiration from different stories, but then also have us empowered around our well-being, around our leadership style, around resilience. So it's really, I'm out to serve my community and help people come away with something maybe they didn't know. So before we dive into the importance of leading with empathy in your journey, could you take a moment, just introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, where you live, and what you do for a living?
Thank you. And I'm so happy to be a part of the conversation. So I'm Marian Lordi. I live in New Providence, New Jersey, so not too far from you. Mm-hmm. And I specialize in talent management, leadership development. I am a certified coach. I'm certified in change management, and I'm educated in organizational psychology. So that's my specialty, those areas.
Wow, that's amazing. And so I can think of no one better to talk to about empathy with, given your background and your experience. Share with us a little bit about your leadership journey. Have us understand sort of where you are today, your experience, especially around empathy for yourself and others.
When I think about this, I think it started for me at a very young age. I was responsible for caring for my brother when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And so when a lot of my friends were going out with their friends when I was a high schooler, I was home taking care of my brother. I would take care of him all summer. I was a babysitter. And so, I was a very sensitive person, and that allowed me to really be in tune to how other people felt. And so leadership comes in many different roles, right? You have parents that are leaders, you have people who are in positions of authority who are leaders, but you could have leaders who are bloggers, influencers. You can have leaders who are religious leaders, like Mother Teresa, Gandhi, who was somebody who, had a whole movement behind him. So leaders come, there's world leaders in government. So leaders come in all different, from all different roles. And mine started really young, and then it just progressed as I went along in my life and the roles that I chose. I always tried to sort of influence the conversation. And what was important to me, it was always creating an environment that was positive. And so what I found over the years is no matter what role I had, whether it was in HR, outside of HR, as an HR business partner, or working in organizational development or learning, I was always wanting to create environments where people could be successful professionally and accept it personally. And I realized that's because of what I wanted for myself. It was really important to me. And as I evolved, I started to become self-aware, more aware that I was wanting that because it's what I wanted for myself as well. So I think that's my journey, really. So it doesn't really matter where you start or where you finish. It matters what you believe in, sort of what your purpose is. And if you know that and you're grounded in your purpose, then other people can resonate with that and you build around it.
It's sort of an energy. I feel like there's a distinct difference when you are interacting with someone who's very comfortable and confident in their purpose versus someone who isn't, right? It's an energy, you feel it, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about empathy, why do you feel empathy is even more important now during, leading throughout this whole COVID experience?
Actually, it's resonated more for people because everyone is having a shared experience. It's really interesting because when, before the pandemic, many people come to work and we always say, people would say, oh, leave your baggage at the door. Well, people can't leave their baggage at the door. It's who they are. and people, if you know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people want to be embraced. They want to be accepted. It's the third level, right? Belonging and love and acceptance. And so you can't ask people to forget a piece of who they are and just leave that behind.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's I would say, that's maybe the environment that was created in a lot of businesses, and you're shaking your head at something that you've experienced. I think when the pandemic hit, and I was doing some consulting work at the time, I started to hear from managers saying, wow, this is really hard. But everyone was working from home. Everyone was learning to use technology. People who had children walking out in and out of meetings. And people didn't know what the boundaries were. They were on too early. They were on late at night. No one knew when to stop. Vacation time. People have the most vacation time going unused right now because there was no place to go. But people have to realize that you can stop and take time for yourself. That's what vacation time is about. That's what personal time is about. You don't have to go somewhere or be doing something. You could be doing something just for you. Even if you sit and stare at a wall, it's for you. So I think that this pandemic has created a shared experience, and that shared experience has heightened empathy in the workplace because people could relate to one another at a level that they weren't able to before, because now they were all sharing in the same. Not everyone's situation was the same, but the variables were similar.
Yeah. I mean, it's the perfect excuse to even talk about our experience, our well-being, right? It's like, because we're all just trying to navigate it to the best of our ability. And yet we're all having our own unique experience of it, but it's so similar, in so many ways. So I have two rather challenging questions I want to ask you, because these are questions that seem to be surfacing a lot, in the space where I am. I'm helping leaders create more compassionate environments, teach their employees some resilience to help them navigate the pandemic. But oftentimes these are the concerns that come up. So my next question is really leaning into your HR background. When you look at the statistics, the CDC says that 1 in 3 in America are now dealing with depression or anxiety because of this pandemic. If we know that, yet we still are working with our cultures from before the pandemic, there's trepidation. Some people, leaders, have trepidation with knowing sort of, how do I address something with my employee if I feel like they're struggling, but respect their personal space and boundaries. I don't want to overstep. There's a fear and a tendency to do nothing because of the risk involved. What would be your advice to a people leader who senses something is going on? How can they support their person, without feeling like they're going to break any rules or overstep?
They can listen. They don't even have to say anything, but they can listen. And it's as simple as saying, hey, how are things going for you today? The hardest thing for people is to hold emotional space for other people. It's something that you learn about in coaching because it's uncomfortable. It's a messy space to be in. It's uncomfortable to watch someone else cry or to hear someone else in emotional pain. Or dealing with a struggle. It's hard enough for them to become vulnerable, but it also causes the listener to be vulnerable. And if we as leaders can be comfortable with being vulnerable, we're allowing the space for the person who works for us to be vulnerable too. And if we listen, we're not giving an opinion, we're not giving a judgment, we're just listening. And that opens up the conversation. If people are asking for advice and things like that, I think that many companies have employee health services, and it's within the leaders' best for them to say, keep in mind that on the back of the health card, there's an employee health service number. Always feel free to reach out to that. It's confidential. You can refer the person to HR, but at the same time, being a good, strong listener, which means maybe listening to what the person is saying beyond the words.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do they value? What's important to them? For example, if we have time to go into some examples.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you have, this happened with my sister-in-law, you know, when the pandemic hit, she has two young girls, an 11-year-old and a 8-year-old, and my brother is a police officer. So he works sometimes nights, and they have crazy hours. The thing is, so sometimes she's alone, right? Like she has to manage, and she worked full-time as well. So, you know, it's hard. She had to say to her boss, I have two kids that I'm homeschooling basically because they weren't going into school. They were using Zoom for the first time to have their lessons. They had questions. So she sits at the dining room table at the head, and the two girls sit on either side. So she's working and they're working.
Mm-hmm.
So she had to say to her boss, until noon, I literally, I'm doing my email, I'm checking, you can call me, but I'm distracted.
Yeah.
So if you just allow me to be able to deal with this, I'm on later and I will be doing work later until I finish what I have to do.
Right.
And he said, yes, do what you have to do. Her book of business has grown. She's been the most productive of all the agents. And I really think that's a great example of understanding, the boss understanding and listening to what was going on for an employee and allowing that employee as an adult to make the best decision that can work for work and for her personal life.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would say this is a company that never allowed remote work. So it was very uncomfortable for them in the beginning because they didn't know how to manage people working from home.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to trust people. We really have to trust people. It's important. If we want to be trusted, we have to demonstrate trust.
Yeah, that's such an important example of meeting your people where they are and allowing them to show up and contribute the best way that they can. I think that's a really good example. I feel like when we talk about people struggling, you know, knowing that it's 1 in 3, knowing that, you know, if you have a team of 10 people, you have members on your team struggling. Mm-hmm. You know, the thing that I always try to remind people is like, don't look away, don't step over it, and don't feel like you got to fix it. So when you say listen, like I always want people to remember the power of just listening. Like, you don't take on the burden that you have to like show up as a clinician. If you just listen, you could be the only person extending your listening to that person.
Exactly.
It's so important.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to know where people are at, right? As a leader. And then that's why I brought up my sister-in-law situation, because I thought the manager really listened to her. Because it would have been very easy to say, no, I need you to be on at 9 o'clock or 8 a.m. or whatever. It would have been very simple to say that, but the person was much more open to understanding what the situation was and got more out of that, out of her performance because of it.
Yeah. I always say, like, you know, we shouldn't have to, but we're almost teaching compassion again, teaching us to relate to one another as humans before, like, they're an employee number, rank, number, whatever, you know, they're people first, they're human beings, they're complex human beings nonetheless. So let's talk a little bit about self-awareness, because you shared when I asked you about your leadership journey, a little bit about how important self-awareness has become for you. And oftentimes, from my own personal experience, the way someone leads is a vivid reflection of the level of self-awareness they have. So my question to you is, if you have a leader that is not self-aware, it's harder for that person to find compassion for others, because I'm going to make the assumption they probably don't know how to demonstrate self-compassion. But if you have a leader like that you're working with, what advice do you have for someone who's feeling like their boss is not self-aware, therefore they're not compassionate or empathetic to their situation? What can they do? What are your thoughts around that?
Something struck me when you said they're hardest on themselves. I think we need to, if we're expecting to to get compassion, we have to give compassion. And so we also have to be compassionate toward the boss who might be judging themselves harshly. So what I find is when people are really coming across judgmental, it's because they judge themselves first. And so I always try to understand what's going on for them. Like, what is that about? And then talk to the person. Like, I realize that this is really important to you because of, what you want to achieve, or it depends on the conversation, but validating, I guess what I should say is validating the importance of their feelings. Therefore will validate the importance of your feelings. But if we only walk around caring about ourselves, then we're also not being self-aware. So I can say, Michelle, you're not self-aware because you're telling me, but maybe I'm not being self-aware because I'm not paying attention to why that's important to you.
Right.
And if I want to get compassion from you, I have to give compassion to you. So when people are judging you, it's often because they're judging themselves, and validating them and validating their feelings and understanding what they value can help provide a window into helping to deal with their lack of self-awareness.
I love that. That's really important, because oftentimes when we sit there and say, well, we're self-aware, they're not. What we're really doing is we're not extending compassion to them. And that's probably the space that needs the most compassion, is for the person that's not demonstrating compassion. Funny. So before we went live, we were talking about, this either or mentality. I have to lead for deliverables, and there's no time for the other stuff. You have a different philosophy, that there's a way that you don't have to choose either or.
Right. I was saying to you, I lead with compassion, but finish with results. I'm a very results-oriented person, but I'm an extremely compassionate person too. I'm insensitive, I'm intuitive, I'm an emotional person, I care about people. But what that means is you can achieve results and actually get the best results, not only from your own work, but working with other people, when you're sensitive and open to others and what they're experiencing. And before we got on the call, I was sharing with you, even yesterday, that a colleague of mine called me up. I love this class I go to at Lifetime Fitness at 6 o'clock at night. And it's my workout. It's important to me. It gives me balance. And I got this phone call maybe 30 minutes before I'm ready to leave, and she was in a panic. We had to do something. We had to write something. She had a meeting that night, and it's her meeting. I could have said, okay, I'll do it tomorrow, no big deal. But I took the 30 minutes. We actually completed the script that we had to write, and I could go to the gym and work out and feel good about it. I thought about not going. I was exhausted by the end of the day. I mean, it was a long day for me. I had so many meetings, but that's a gift to me.
Yeah.
So that was important to me. And because I was able to give to her and we were able to get the result we needed to get, I felt good about that. Yeah. And she could go off and do what she needed to do, and I could go off and do what I wanted to do, and everybody was happy.
Yeah.
But you can give compassion by just understanding what the person's situation is. And she was panicking. So I didn't want her to panic. I wanted to help as much as I could. And I was just listening for what she needed. And I realized what she needed was a little help writing this, and it would make a world of difference. So I was happy that we did it.
And that's awesome. And I love that you believe that you can do both. You can achieve deliverables and also have compassion. It doesn't have to be that we're all so focused on, the net result and there are dead bodies along the way, just trying to get to that result. Like, we have to make sure and how we deliver and how we work is just as effective, which is, I love that.
Sometimes, in HR, I've heard like people have sharp elbows. Did you ever hear that?
No, what does that mean?
So it means like or like they're a bull in a china shop. So they rub people the wrong way. Oftentimes it's because of how, they want to achieve a result, And it's how they get to that result that gets in the way. And what we need to remember is that people value different things. So not everybody's the same. So again, if we're listening to what other people value, and if we're also paying attention to how people influence, like some people influence based on a process. Some people influence through other people. Some people influence through authority. They use their position.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to these kinds, and this is when I talk about listening, you listen for all different kinds of things, you can understand. So if a person's really concerned about the process, and if there's no process around something, and they're coming strong because they're looking for that, you can talk with them about, well, what would help make this work for you? What do you need? What's missing? That's a different conversation than saying, oh, that person is so aggressive and assertive, and they're not getting along with others, and then complaining about it, right? Now, what are you, as the individual who's experienced that situation with the person, going to do about it? We're all adults. So what are we going to do to help contribute to make it better, and not necessarily the opposite effect, which is to complain about it and make it worse?
Well said. Yeah, that's really important. We often rush to judgment and rush to label without exploring the underlying, goal or motive that the person has. We're only looking at the impact on us versus beyond that.
And it speaks to mental health too, right? Sometimes if a person is experiencing an emotional low or emotional high, this can show up actually at work or how they interact with others. So rather than judge, we can stop and take a step back and say, hey, how are things going for you?
Yeah.
How can I help?
Yeah.
And helping doesn't mean, if you don't have time yourself because you're dealing with your own stuff, it doesn't mean that you have to drop everything and help them, but you can help by listening.
Right.
And that actually might progress the conversation further and help, move things along, as opposed to creating roadblocks for a person, especially at work. It becomes such a problem when there's
I love so much about what you're sharing, because I'm a stan that there be more compassionate environments for people to perform in, for everyone, people with invisible disabilities, with physical disabilities, like a compassionate, supportive work environment where people care for one another. That's what I'm a stand for. So I love everything that you're saying about get curious. You're basically saying get curious. Don't judge by what you see on the surface. Get curious and offer your listening.
Yes.
Yeah, really great.
Not your judgment, you're listening.
Right, exactly. Any final words of wisdom from you to leaders out there, just, trying to hold it all together and move forward in the world of COVID right now?
Take time for yourself. You're important. You're worthy. You deserve it. Don't let your own fears perhaps get in the way. People always have, we say, a gremlin on your shoulder. Oh, you should have done that. You should have done that. You're not good enough. You're not doing enough. You have to do more for your children, more for your spouse, more for your friends, more for your family. And the truth is, you have to do more for you and prioritize you. And what I do hope from the pandemic is that we remember how to be compassionate and have empathy for one another, and give people the space that they need to feel good, to allow them to do the things to feel good, but also be productive at work. So if we walk away with anything, it's just prioritizing ourselves, our well-being, as leaders, focusing on our well-being, because that role modeling will present to other people and others will follow.
Amazing. And thank you so much for joining me today on this show. We really appreciate you being here and sharing what you did share. I'm so grateful to know you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.